and McCann.
Greetings. Welcome to Wake the Dead. Today we are very happy to have first-time guest, Mr. Jon Uhler. Welcome, Jon. Hello.
Jon, it's a pleasure to be with you.
Wonderful. You have 30 years experience. You are a licensed professional counselor, and you have a certified clinical trauma professional, certified sex offender treatment provider, and your clinical background spans over 30 years with clinical specialties dealing with sexual trauma and dissociation, severely emotionally disturbed adolescents, sex offenders, and psychopaths. So this here, you are right on the main nerve of what this show is talking about and what we've been really digging into for the past 2.5, almost 3 years. And we are delighted to have you, and we are very excited to learn from what you have to tell us. Thank you.
Again, Sean, good to be with you, and I appreciate your work. Thank you for what you are doing, and it takes a whole army of us, right, to kind of push back the darkness and to unmask the evil.
That's right. That's right. One of your websites uses the term unmasking, and that's unmasking the trans movement is, I guess, unmaskingthetransmovement.com. Is that correct?
Correct.
And where you are fighting like to protect women and children in their personal spaces, and to keep them safe from predators. You're seeking to fight against genital mutilation of children, and as am I, from a different angle, in a different way. So you are in a kindred spirit in a way here. You also have a website that we're going to share here. The SurvivorSupport.net. And this is the home screen here for everybody can see.
There we go.
And you have lots of information here. You have the process of healing, journey to healing, help for the journey. And this is full of information. Today here, right here, we have porn and dark deviance. This is actually where I wanted to bring our conversation today, because you did a extensive series with Emma Catherine of the Imagination podcast, and we thank her immensely for what she's doing and to giving you a platform. And that, she does a great show, and all of my listeners should be listening to her too. And in one of the recent series that you have worked together with her is to reveal the mind of a psychopath. And this you laid it out in chart, and you showed us how the deviant deviant sexual tendencies of psychopaths reveals how far along on the scale of psychopathy they really are. And that hit my brain like a light bulb, like ding, of course. Can you, I guess, just explain that for us and tell us in your words how that works, just to get us started?
Yeah, happy to, and give a little more context. I never imagined when I started my career that I would be as knowledgeable about sexual psychopaths as I am. I had no interest in it, right? As a matter of fact, I was just going to do marriage and family counseling. Graduated from Cal State Fullerton a few years ago, 1992. So it shows you how long I've been doing this. But that also, by the way, gives me perspective to speak to the trans deception, so the trans movement, that it's man-made, by the way, and it's a predator's perfect opportunity, financial and sexual, to gain access to kids. So that's sort of the link. If people are wondering, why, Jon, why do you have that site along with this? So I am all about protecting women and children. I've been working with sexual predators for about 15 years now. I started working with survivors, have continued. As a matter of fact, I do counseling by day and sex offender treatment by night. I currently have 5 sex offender treatment groups. I'm one of South Carolina's largest providers of what's called community-based treatment. So once a guy is out of prison, or if he has not gone to prison, but he is mandated into treatment. I received a rare, not many people are able to qualify for ATS. As a matter of fact, you can see half the, that plaque, and the reason I'm bringing that up, that plaque behind me is the Association for Treatment of Sexual Abusers. I received their clinical and research certification. They just have clinical now. Mine was approved very quickly because of the amount of hours I have working with sex offenders. I think you needed about 2,000 or 3,000 clinical contact hours. At that time, I had 11,000. So I have a lot of experience with this. Was hired by the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections. That's where I have my prison experience as far as being on psych staff. I started the nation's first intensive treatment program in long-term solitary confinement. I also am the first prison psych staff to blow the whistle on inmate abuse in that environment. So I'm the reason why there is no more solitary confinement used for punishment on mental health inmates. So I'm him. There's another record, I guess. But because I spent 6 solid years in a solitary confinement environment, I accrued more clinical contact hours than any single prison psychology staff member in the US or Canada. And then ran one of Pennsylvania's standalone forensic high-intensity 65-bed unit for sexually violent predators, and did high and low intensity sex offender treatment. I've done hundreds of sex offender evaluations, done hundreds of risk assessments, specialized reports. So that's not for me kind of waving my credentials. It's just to help understand, and reasonably so, because I bring a different perspective. Academics, now I should add, I spent 8 years with Geneva College, which is north of Pittsburgh. So I was an adjunct professor. So I understand academia as well. In lieu of publishing, and at some point in time I'll publish, I just don't have the time right now, SurvivorSupport.net is there. I thought, you know what, people do need to be able to have a sense of what I'm about. I also have a blog, by the way. It's called SurvivorSupport.net. So if I haven't been able to add to that for a while, but that's, Sean, I didn't mean for you to necessarily bring it up. It's just to kind of, so that one is there. Okay. As well as there's another site called churchprotect.org, and that has a lot of my more forensic experience. As a matter of fact, it has the feedback I receive from the highest levels of the Department of Corrections. So all that to say, let me share with you there we go. If you go into the Truths tab, what I did is it's one thing to have peer-reviewed literature, which is reviewed by other peers. I thought, you know what, I'm going to go one better, and I'm going to have professional peer reviewed. Okay, and there's the series that I've been doing with Emma Catherine, or that we did, and there's the same chart, by the way. Right. So if you want to find a more extensive elaboration on what we're going to talk about today, that whole series is right there.
Right.
Okay, all that to say, what I learned is not in the literature, and that's why I will get it into the literature sooner rather than later. Because there is something to be said for, and liken myself, and I think I can do this in humility. I liken myself to the Jane Goodall of sex offender researchers. Now, for those that don't know who Jane Goodall is, and that's not a commentary on me or my clientele, by the way, but she, prior to having a PhD, and I'm probably not going to get a PhD. I just, the question is, do I need to? If I was going to, it'd be in dissociative identity disorder. I know that very well, working with SRA and MK Ultra clients. That's the majority of my clientele nowadays. And so even today, after we're finished, I'll be working with another horrifically abused individual that has parts.
God bless you for doing that. Just being you're in more than one trench right now fighting this war, and these people need the healing, and thank you.
Yeah. And it is a little different, right? I can go from working with survivors. As a matter of fact, through the majority of the week, I'll finish working with survivors and then gather my things and turn on the computer with a different screen and working with sex offenders, the men that create survivors. So I know populations very well. And for those that try to say there is no such thing as repressed memories, they don't know what they're talking about. Okay.
Right.
So the thing I didn't know about sex offenders, let alone sexual predators, since that was not my background, I came into the prison system having been recruited, but still believing and still want to believe that there's hope. There's always hope for someone. That's actually not the case, but I didn't know that. So I'm glad I came from my perspective so that I'm still useful. But you quickly find out that the only way to truly do reliable and valid research on certain populations is to embed yourself. And that's why I liken myself to Jane Goodall, who went into the rainforest and lived among chimpanzees. And it was groundbreaking. Why? Because prior to that, people would go to zoos and they would observe, or they might go out and take some footage, but nobody thought about living for months in the wild. Yet this Australian gal decided to do that, right? And she came out alive, number one. But she saw different things that nobody had ever seen before because they hadn't taken the time. Sometimes it just takes time. She noticed they make little tools when they're going to eat termites, and the different behaviors amongst themselves that, again, it's simply going to take time. So she embedded herself, and that's called qualitative research. So there's quantitative, that's where 4 out of 5 dentists recommend whatever kind of toothpaste, right? That's where you get kind of the stats. So looking at quote unquote normal versus what's outside the bell-shaped curve. Then you have what's called qualitative, which is you're going to be looking over time for things that you can't really measure with hash marks or with looking for certain statistical averages. So you're going to be looking at themes. You're going to be looking at inclinations. That's a different kind of research. That takes kind of a specialization in terms of you got to make sure that what you're observing is natural rather than contrived. And so I would first say anybody that's doing research on sex offenders, think about the nature of that kind of offense. I've worked with the full continuum of criminals and therefore criminal minds. I should also mention I'm certified in the Hare Psychopathy checklist. Okay, so the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections flew Dr. Robert Hare, who designed the PCLR. That's the gold standard of psychopathy forensic assessments that will hold up in court. As a matter of fact, the Pennsylvania Sex Offender Assessment Board, the SOAB board, which is a secondary board that is mandated to do assessments on those that have been labeled by a judge as a sexually violent predator. The SOAB board does, as far as its normal assessment, they use the PCLR. Why? Because if anybody's been labeled as an SVP, a sexually violent predator, the assumption is they are, by degree, they're a psychopath. So I'm certified in the Hare Psychopathy checklist.
Right.
Okay, so the question is, with that kind of offense and very few people in prison are there for sex offenses, given the amount of male population, or as far as inmates. Okay, sex offenders represent a minority in the overall general population in a male prison. It's almost
Right.
unheard of in a female prison. So when you think of prison, sex offenders are in the minority, yet their offense, by the time they're busted, they have many victims, and their offense is so unique. And that's why, above all kinds of crimes, we have them register. Right? We don't have murderers. We just don't get me going. Right? There's pros and cons, but isn't it very interesting? Intuitively, I think we all sense that there's something different about that kind of offender. That's why the majority of inmates want to harm sex
Kill
offenders.
them, right?
Right? Okay.
They call them skinners, and
Right?
they have to be held in a separate area, protective custody, because all the other inmates wish to kill them. I personally went to prison when I was 19 for selling cannabis. It's silly.
So
But
I didn't know. You've seen it, right?
so I know, like, I've been in there, and like they call them skinners, and they, protective custody. They're locked down 23 hours a day, like the solitary, like, and they to get out and wash, they even have like handcuffs and stuff, like just for that 1 hour they're allowed to use the phone. But anyway, while I was there, I was in Middleton prison, which is Essex County, Massachusetts. And while I was there in 2001, Father Gagan from the scandal in the Boston Boston Globe.
There you go, Boston Globe.
That whole revelation about the Catholic priests in Boston and cardinal law being promoted and given his own church in Vatican City from this whole thing. Well, that's a whole nother rabbit hole. But Father Gagan was arrested, and he was he was a federal prisoner, but this place would house federal prisoners for so many months, and before they moved him on to the next one. And he was in the same jail, Middleton, in a different block, in the protective Skinner's block, basically. And I watched on the news with all the other inmates as we learned that somebody snuck into protective custody and killed him. That was the end of his life, because they apparently the person who killed him had a daughter that was abused, and like, maybe not by him, that particular priest didn't abuse his particular daughter, but he has this rage, wants to take it out and kill this abuser. And like you said, we know intuitively that they're not like, I mean, you don't need to have a murderer registry, because murder is like, it just happens. I feel like I want to kill just this once. It's not like a drive internally, like we all have a sex drive that's always there. Like, that's like part of our physiology, you know what I mean? And so like, a sex offender will always want to reoffend because he has a sex drive,
certain categories, Sean, that's very important. And
right.
Let me qualify one thing. If a sex offender isn't in protective custody, at least in Pennsylvania and South Carolina, I'm going to guess for the majority of the states, though, they can be in general population. They typically are. So if they're not under protective custody, they're in general population.
Wow.
But at least in Pennsylvania, they are very protected. So, but it doesn't mean that people don't, find their way into cells.
Exactly. I have a suspicion that the guards let him in. I think that, because I don't think it's possible. There's a whole, like, all the doors are controlled by the guards.
That's right. So as they say, accidents happen.
Right.
So all that to say, to truly understand the criminal mind, let alone the mind of a sex offender, I mean, there's benefit, and that's how we've gotten research that we have. There's value to, because it's very unusual for somebody to have a lot of access to criminals, right? If you're an academic researcher, and it's ironic because those that have the ability to do the best kind of research tend not to, because they're either not interested or they're too busy that would be those within a prison. So the people that have the greatest access as far as academics, shall we say, which would be the psych staff typically, they don't take the opportunity because they are so busy. So people with the greatest access could do it. I did it. I produced all sorts of charts. At some point in time, again, I'll publish it, but I did publish it on my two websites, churchprotect.org and Survivor Support. But the academics, it really takes a lot to be able to do research, because you have to go through an entire process. It's very lengthy to get permission, to arrange it. Who are you going to speak with? Because you either have a certain inmate in mind, or you're just going to get a quote unquote representative sample. And that's the first flaw, by the way, because if anybody's worked in a prison, John, as you know, right, and the majority of people doing research on pedophiles don't have a certain pedophile in mind. There's a Sandusky, so they would arrange in Pennsylvania, takes a while, right, to have him brought out. Pierce Morgan interviews certain inmates. Okay, that's one way. Generally speaking, what they'll say is this. They'll write to the Department of Corrections and say, we're doing research. We would like to have access to 5 or 6 sex offenders. Could you make that available? So right there, it's showing that they're leaving it to the system and then the internal workings of a prison. What the average, and this is important for us to spend time on just for a moment, because academic researchers publish, and that's how we end up getting this information, at least that we think is true. And I'll give you one example that's actually an urban legend, and then I'll finish how research is done. Okay, if you ask most people why a pedophile offends, what you will hear nowadays are 2 things. Well, he was acting out his own sexual abuse, and hurt people hurt people. Okay, that is a lie. Okay, now that's different than child on child, and you can have an adult that might be at risk, but as I tell people, if you want to do accurate research on the impact of sexual abuse on adults that are in prison, so men that have crossed legal lines, we're not going to say what kind of offense, but if you want to do research on adult men hurt people to find out, are they going to perpetrate, are they going to hurt others? You don't go to the sex offender unit, you go to the drug and alcohol unit.
Right.
Okay, because survivors become uniquely protective, not exploitive. So those that volunteer for the research project, and this is really important for people to know, that a lot of the information that we garnered from, or that's in the quote unquote literature, that's now what I call urban legend or quote unquote understood, got into the research from interviews. And the question is, who did they interview? They interviewed those sex offenders that volunteered. Well, what inmate in their right mind is going to raise their hand, because there are no secrets in jail? And if you, right, researchers on the block, everybody knows when people come and go in prison. Well, somebody goes up to the officer's desk, right, the officer station, and now leaves the block, and everybody sees the newspaper and the news anyways, just as you indicated. So everybody knows the sex offenders. Well, the last thing they want to do is highlight themselves. Why? Because it's dangerous in prison. So the question is this: what kind of inmate who's a sex offender is going to magnify their offense in a prison yard, right? Right? It's only those that know they're the most protected by the administration. Well, who is that? The most manipulative? Because
Right.
they're the best inmates. Well, the question is this: then why weren't they the best civilians? Because they're the world's greatest liars. So you have the world's greatest manipulators and liars, the greatest criminal mind, because by the time they're busted, they didn't give themselves up. You notice that. So by the time they're busted, they have hundreds of victims. The kinds that I focus on most are the most sophisticated. What's the difference? You look at the people around them, you look at their reaction, and you'll see the difference between low level versus sophisticated, impulsive versus not. The impulsive is the one that All the neighbors knew about the creepy guy down the street and told the kids not to go around him. Nobody's surprised when he's busted. It's the pastor, it's the priest, it's the principal, it's the psychologist, it's the law enforcement individual. It's everybody who also tends to be a mandated reporter. In order to be a mandated reporter, you're in a profession, you're in a job that requires no criminal background. So these are individuals that made it into adulthood unscathed, who are the most affable, who gain the trust and the respect in positions of authority, that are the least suspected. So those are not the emotionally reactive ones that have been perped on, because if a kid is perped on, there's going to be a paper trail because they're acting out or acting in. They will not make it through high school without somebody noticing there's some issues. So you mean to tell me, and here are the people that are the subjects of the research. Hurt people, and they're reenacting their own abuse. It's a lie, because the ones that volunteer are those who are the most well-adjusted, and they're the greatest liars, and the researchers don't know that these perps are practicing for parole.
Right.
What's going to fly in terms of the lies? So all that to say, what I'm going to show you is how sexual psychopaths are made, because right now the research either comes from the mouths of sex offenders, sexual predators, and we say, well, no, they aren't made. They somehow, it was environment. They were abused, and that's what drove them. Okay, where did we learn that from? The research. Okay, and hopefully that makes sense why I went into that. So the research is based upon not looking into the kinds of, not doing the proper research. What's that entail? It entails the ability to embed yourself within the sex offender population, or do sex offender treatment the right way, and having access to 100% of criminal histories, all their files, being able to watch them 24/7, have their rooms or cells shaken down, read their mail, and listen to their phone calls 24/7. Surveillance. What academic research is going to have that? As a matter of fact, the access I have as a community-based provider right now is equal to or even better than still an academic researcher. James Canner, for instance, says he did research with sex offenders. Well, according to himself, he did 6 months of an internship in a hospital program. A day program where they had groups. Okay, exactly what I'm doing. First of all, I would submit I'm doing more groups. I access more sex offenders per week than he ever did per week on his best week. Plus, I have more hours working with him. Yet he's going to sit there and say, well, his academic research. No, because you have no idea as a community-based provider or academic, when that guy leaves your office, if your research is done with guys in the community, who are you doing that with? Guys on parole, because you're not going to put an ad in the paper saying, hey, has anybody offended a kid? Come on in, I want to do unbiased research. No, it's only those men that have been busted that are within the criminal justice system. Okay. So what is your research going to be based upon? Canner says he scanned the brains, and he did. Okay, what did he find? He found, there's activity in certain parts of the brain. Yeah, white matter, it grows. Those are the neural connections. So he concluded those neural connections were there in utero before birth, really. And where's your longitudinal scans? Now, you have a static scan, meaning the guy's age 30. I'm making this up, but okay, you took a brain scan at age 30. And you saw that the areas of the brain, the white matter, are bigger in certain areas of the brain of sex offenders. Well, repetitive activity will increase the white matter. That's called, neurodevelopment. The brain is going to continue neuroplasticity. So what we know is this: a guy that sex offends has unusual growth in certain parts of the brain because of unusual activity that's repetitive. Oh, how about pornography? Oh, we don't want to go there because Cantor pushes and he promotes pornography. He minimizes the danger. He was pushing that on his own Facebook page all through the lockdown.
Is he the guy that was promoting the child sex doll for the pedophiles?
He promotes child sex doll. He says there's nothing wrong with that. He says it will actually decrease the likelihood of offending. And Dr. James Cannon,
it's practice, dude. It's practice.
Come on my podcast anytime. And your basis for that is what?
Right.
Right?
His belief. It's
right?
belief,
His
not knowledge.
To have belief. He also is against the mandated reporting of any guy that says he's actively looking at child porn. And he believes in virtuous pedophiles, that there are guys that are non-offending pedophiles. Really, how do you get his statement to me? He and I interacted a couple times online. I said, now, how do you know they're being honest? Well, I would know. Really?
Right.
The science
takes one to know one,
that's
guy.
the best you got, right? I would know. World greatest liars. I still have guys that are manipulating me all the time.
Right.
It never ceases to amaze me that I'm still surprised that I get a call from a PO, and she says, "Yeah, he won't be showing up in your group." I said, "What's going on?" Well, we found 2 phones. When they went and shook down his room, at the halfway house or wherever, even at their own home. I said, they have 2, right? These guys are such rascals.
Right.
I don't minimize it. So, yes.
I did want to tie the fact that they're such good liars. This is a huge piece of understanding for like, why is the government run by psychopaths? Why is it that Dennis Hastert, the longest Speaker of the House, was a notorious pedophile who was a gym teacher who abused kids, and then they gave him a job in the government, and he was the longest sitting Speaker of the House, and they were like sending him to Thailand to go, like other countries were giving him like sex vacations with little kids. And it's common knowledge, like he went to jail for the kid that he was sending money to stay quiet spoke up, and he tried to sue that kid for breach of his contract. I mean, like, so this level of psychopaths, and like we promote anarchy on the show, that all beings are free. There is no such thing as true authority is based in love and care for, there is no anyway, we don't need to get into that, but basically, to understand why government is the way that it is, why do they promote the things they do? Why is it that big business is such a psychopathic, like, why is it all anti-human, but then if you look, why did they choose Dennis Hastert? Why Jeffrey Epstein? Why pedophiles? The reason that they choose pedophiles to populate these places, because they can keep secrets. They are the best liars. It's like the best resume for someone who wants to work in a kakistocracy, that rule by the worst. These are the people that get chosen to keep the secrets, to do the immoral behaviors, and have a face that doesn't show any empathy and no morality inside, that can lie the best. I mean, like, look at the people like Fauci and the rest of them, like during that whole, like the way that they controlled our minds through the media. It's all lies, manipulation, and it only makes sense that they would choose these type of psychopaths to be their spokespeople, up there promoting whatever lie is on the agenda of the ruling class. So this is important to learn, that the way that their minds work, and to understand, like, a lot of people are like, oh, who would do such a thing? Because they are moral. Most people have a moral center, and they look at some atrocity and think, oh, that couldn't be on purpose. Who would do that? They just can't fathom that, because their minds don't work like psychopath. So the psychopath really is, it should be a big focus of study for a lot of people, and to understand really what is going on in this world. There is predators and they look like the human race, but they, you know, their minds are different. And you're telling us that psychopathy is not a condition that a child is born with. Can you elaborate on that? I want to get into that a little bit.
By all means. And, you know, Sean, I'm very glad you referenced about anarchy. For those that follow me, let me just speak to that just for a moment.
Please.
Which is, you know, my own perspective is that, and it's interesting, the second most widely used satanic symbol is the upside down A. You look at Antifa, right? That actually stands for anarchy. So it's interesting, at least from my perspective. I tend to come from I come from a Judeo-Christian perspective, which simply means this, that God values order in this sense, that unless there's structure in a healthy way, and unless there is, I mean, ultimately, as goes the nuclear family, so goes society. If you want to create a dictatorship, if you want to create a population that's easily manipulated or incited to do these stupid riots, and they're not stupid, right? They're property damage. We've seen stuff on college campuses now.
The Antifa people a lot of them do very immoral stuff, and they, you know, they wear the moniker of anarchy, and then it demonizes me. I just want to go garden and not deal with the government. You know what I mean?
The thing is, let people be free to, which is very much a, how should we say? Well, very much human rights. And I concur 100%. Exactly. Yes. Unfortunately, because within, and this will speak to psychopathy, my perspective is this, that deep within the human heart, unfortunately, ever since the fall, there's a little clenched fist. It's called willfulness. We could say a middle finger. Okay, that even those of us that are parents know that it's probably only a matter of time till that little angelic being that's come into our home, right? And if we're a sucker, us dads, right? Some of them, our daughters, wrap themselves around our little finger, right? And so we're manipulated by them, but they're so darn cute. Until they reach a certain age, about the age of 2. And then we have certain phrases for that span of time. We call it the terrible twos. Or right. Where does that come from? We're the most loving people in their lives. We would give our lives for our kids. But all of a sudden, in a couple of years, they have the temerity to look up at us because we're 5 times their height, and they actually tell us no. So we're their authority, and they defy that. That's within the human heart. So the goal of parenting is to break the will without breaking the spirit. Yes. So we want to help a child, because the way to create a menace is spoil a child. You give them anything you want. Right? As a matter of fact, that's the woke mentality in a way. These young people are surprised that law enforcement actually put its handcuffs on them. I've been watching these riots. The police, the authority tell them, disband, you have an unlawful assembly, and the police go to grab them. And a lot of these demonstrators are saying, why are you handcuffing me? And it's like, well, the officer, the law enforcement authority told you to move, and you're defying it, yet you're shocked with natural consequences. So, so deep within the human heart, there is a defiance. You never have to teach a kid to disobey, or to, you know, they go into the sandbox. Little Johnny looks at little Susie's toys, and what's little Johnny gonna do, right? Hopefully, but it's only a matter of time. Every parent's had this. No, buddy, that's not yours. Leave. No.
Right.
Stop. No, give that back. You apologize now for. Okay, so we have even the violation of property rights. It's just something. And there's been enough studies to show that there's something within us that will actually take delight. It's not good. It has to be trained out of somebody. As we begin to help a child, and this is part of parenting, we have to help a child understand they're not the center of the universe.
Right.
But we have to help them play nice, right? That they can't take all the cookies, they can't take all the toys. That there is other kids are just as important. So we have to train that into a child.
Well, the love. So, like, I agree with you, and I'm a father of a 4-year-old at the moment, and he's still like he's like very defiant. Right? But the thing when he does follow what I say, it's because he loves me. You know, and it's the same when we as adults do the moral thing, or like do God's law, it's because we love that. We choose with our own free will. Like, it's evident that we can say no, and we can defy, and we can harm others. It's possible, that is like that, it, like, laws aren't going to stop that. People are going to go do that if they want to. It's their will, so everyone does have free will, and that 2-year-old has his free will, and the only way to get through to him, well, there's, I guess, many ways, but words and care, and if you can control yourself or whatnot, when you can help him to grow, to understand what he cares about, and to follow that, and to trust. Trust and care is inherent in that. And the psychopath, like a Levian Satanist, all he cares about is ego. I want what I want. And it's like that little 2-year-old all grown up.
Will. It's the
whole.
Right. But what's the difference between that or a 2-year-old? Absolutely.
That's right. Exactly.
And sophistication.
Like, if you listen to Svali or whatever, she was a programmer, and she talked about cultivating that in the 2-year-old. Like, when the 2-year-old has that tantrum, the programmers would praise that and enhance that and make that happen more often. And so, like, you think that people that grew up to be the Hitlers or whatever, that were SRA programmed, had that trained out of them, the opposite of what a loving family would do, to create the psychopath that can sit at the realm, the reins of power of whatever, DuPont, like whatever whatever corporation that rapes and destroys humanity. They need a psychopath to stand to be there, to hold the reins, and to continue the psychopathy of the generations of that family. So we can learn, we learn that the SRA is not only done to the people that they want to program, it's also done to their own children. And it a friend of the show, Carrie Olahe, on her own podcast, Desert Takini on YouTube, she describes the difference between like, you can traumatize a kid so far where they will split and they will have the multiples. But if you continue to traumatize and you don't give them any loving, caring, like the nurturing part of it totally severs, and it turns them into psychopathy. That type of abuse, if done properly, can not only cause the splits of the multiples, which are programmed, it can also turn full psychopath. And you're like, we were about to go into how psychopathy is like as far as what you've discovered with the individuals that you speak to in the prisons, and it's a stepwise progression where they choose in that moment to not listen to their internal morality and their conscience, and they mute their conscience for that moment of sexual gratification or whatever it may be, and that muting process becomes a habit and a regular becomes the new personality, I guess, where they just continually push down this moral thing where it becomes non-existent. And if you think about the dark occult rituals of the Bohemian Grove, they do a cremation of care, where they burn away their care, so they no longer have the guilt and the karmic repercussions of their actions. And if you think of the even with Crowley talking about the magic of the magic 77, it's 2 sevens, not 3. It's like it's an awakened mental, like, mind, and an awakened action, but not an awakened emotion emotional understanding. So it's not the three pillars of consciousness, it's only two. And they believe that they are more powerful because they don't have that conscience holding them back from doing the evil. And they believe that to be freedom in a way.
And that's and Sean, thank you for. I'm fairly familiar with Crowley, but I hadn't heard that. So, but that's a perfect description. And in a way, they are right, and they are what they are more free. And that's the one thing that
sadly,
really, right? Yeah. Now, I'm not advocating that kind of freedom, but that's the one thing that, as I posit, kind of my own theory of psychopathy, because the couple of theories out there are this, as any of us try to figure out, how does somebody get to a point where they can do things to other people? And that really is a good definition of psychopathy. Psychopathy really boils down to three things. Okay, so there's two kinds of psychopaths, a bloody psychopath and a white-collar psychopath. That term was coined by Robert Hare. Okay, so psychopathy, regardless of the track, and that's, you'll see the kind of the arrows on that chart that I put in there, regardless of the track that somebody goes down, it always comes down to three things. It comes down to no conscience, no empathy, and no remorse, and I'll tell you why. Which sets the stage for, meaning everybody will agree with that. Well, that's the premise of my own theory, my own perspective, because most people will say, well, it has to be nature, nurture, or genetics, or brain structure. It is brain structure. I featured a neuroscientist in a video that I did with Emma Catherine, the one that's up there, as a matter of fact, the brain differences. We talk about the brain difference. So there's no question as to whether or not the brain of a psychopath is different. Robert Hare found that in the functional MRIs. Now the question of what is different. So there's certain areas of the brain that are smaller or less active in a psychopath. Now the question is this: how did that happen?
Right.
And from that point on, it's all theory, unless you can scan the brains, unless you can find something definitive. So we know we have an effect, or we have a brain that's different. Now the question is, how did they get that brain? It's much easier, I would say, for us as people, let alone as researchers. It's easier in terms of comfort level to believe and to want to believe that somebody was born that way. Why? Because when you meet someone who's a psychopath, it's really disconcerting when you talk. Right? It's a little bit uncomfortable when he says, well, why'd you kill him? Well, I almost felt badly, but I had to. It's nothing personal. It's just business or something. It's like The Godfather. It's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. And
what kind of stuff can they do to other people and do to you? So if you've ever had a chance to interact with real life psychopaths, it's quite something. And I have had years and years. And to find out that they're not faking it, that something within them now is different. And the question is, how did they get that way? So is it nature? So is it genetics? Unless somebody can prove that, how would you prove it? You'd have to start in utero, and you'd have to now do brain scans.
Right. And you'd have to have a brain chip in the baby or something.
Right.
Like monitor it constantly. Right.
So we're going to now, the only way you could do it is scan the brains of every single baby on Earth, or a large enough population, and every year you scan their brains. Well, who's going to do that?
Well, the government's working on that, I'm sure.
Oh, they're right. Yeah. Okay. So, you can't, one scan, what it means is this: the person's different. Now the question is, how did they become different? What I say is this, that my theory, and I believe it 100%, matches the definition of a psychopath, which is no conscience, no remorse, and no empathy. So how do you get a psychopath? You make them. How do you make them? You start with the key feature, which is conscience. So the question is this: how does somebody get to a point where they have no conscience? You're not born that way, right? Every teacher, every parent understands a child's going to defy just what we talked about. They're going to look at us and say no. Now, does that mean your child's a psychopath? Well, if you don't do anything in time, you can create a little psychopath. Okay. You want to help the child begin to understand they're not the center of the universe. So you do that with love and limits.
That's right.
So that they begin to engage their conscience, right? Most parents understand, Johnny, you know what? That wasn't right. How would you feel? So what are you speaking to? You're saying there's a law that's higher than them. They're not the arbiter of the laws of the universe, that if they want it, they have it. If they want it, they can take it if they want it, right? Okay, so a selfish individual believes and has come to the conclusion the world revolves around them. So psychopathy, in my estimation, is selfishness on a scale of 1 to 10.
That's right.
The more selfish you become, the more you override your conscience. That's how you can become selfish and be okay with it and actually get to a point where you like it, you value it, and you want to double down on it. So there's a dynamic principle in play, and that's what people need to understand. That's what finally sunk home for me, and now it makes sense, and now I can work with them effectively, which is, if you understand that the more someone violates their conscience, there's a lot of things that happen simultaneously within someone. So that means none of us are ever static. And the best way to view this is on the slippery slope. The old-fashioned term, the straight and narrow, the path or the way. As a matter of fact, in sex offender treatment, I have the guys in my group come equipped with, as part of their homework, they have to have a verse out of the book of Proverbs. I'm not Jewish. I really like that book. It's time-tested. It far precedes and predates psychology, and Freud is 3,000 years old. It's called the Book of Wisdom. And I think it's safe to say that none of the guys would be in my groups if they had practiced what's in the book of Proverbs. And the only time you need the book of Proverbs is when there are people around. If you crash land on a tropical island, you're there by yourself. You may pray to be rescued or not to be rescued, but you'll never have to pray for wisdom. So wisdom is the application of knowledge, which has to do with boundaries, quite frankly.
Right.
So every guy that has violated somebody else's rights in whatever way has chosen not to walk on the straight and narrow, so gotten off the path.
Right.
That's the theme of my groups, quite frankly. So the best way to understand psychopathy is the best way to understand us, which I think is the best way, is to go back to the book of Proverbs, go back to ancient wisdom that I think comes from above, which says this: there is a way that is correct, that if we walk in it, the path of wisdom, we will do right. Most cultures have the phrase, most parents around the world, as the kids going to school, the parents will say something like, okay, have a good day, make sure you do right, be good, right? What are we, every kid blows that off, but anyway, no, I'm kidding, right? But what are we doing? We're re-emphasizing that, my son, my daughter, you're going to experience a lot of different challenges, temptations, or whatever, but be good. Okay, so what are we saying? Stay on the straight and narrow. So every culture has that concept.
Right.
But if we get off the straight and narrow, the path, the way, we're going to start to go down the slippery slope.
So that straight and narrow path is, it is compassion. Like if you listen to the Buddhists, that is their main focus. That's what they're trying to cultivate within others, because that is the epitome of how would you feel, and if you, like, they see themselves as like we're all beings that are alive are a family, and we're all together experiencing. So have compassion for the other, because suffering does exist in this world, and we know that it's wrong because it hurts me to be hurt. So I know not to hurt you. And it's like, that's the only real wisdom, and it's natural law, and morality is what keeps us on that good path. What mom wants you to do at school, what your priest or your pet, like whatever your religious whatever, they want you to maintain the moral steps on your own path.
It's the golden rule.
That's right.
Treat others how you would want to be treated.
Exactly.
And that Jesus spoke of that. He was trying to help people understand that, religiosity or dead religion is really still is a cover for self-centeredness, right? So look at the priests that perp, look at those that are fleecing the flock. In 2 Peter chapter 2, Peter, a disciple of Jesus, he warned early Christians that, listen, there's going to be wolves in sheep's clothing. That's where we get that term. And he doesn't commend the church for naivety or being blind to the fact. In that case, he says, there's guys in there that are helping themselves to the cash. They've gotten into positions of leadership. They're helping themselves to the cash and the women. What are you doing not noticing this? So we cannot turn a blind eye. In Psalm 101, it's kind of interesting, or I would say, well, Biology 101, in Psalm 101, at the end of it, it's a really good psalm written 3,000 years ago for spiritual growth, or what does a spiritual person do and what does he look like? At the end of that, David says, my mission will be to ferret out evil every day. Now, as a king or in authority, that's a good charge, that we want to promote the good, but we want to make sure that perpetrators, oppressors, and psychopaths, all one and the same, quite frankly, by degree, that they are not manipulating and getting over and harming other people. So we have to be mindful that human nature is selfish. We want to train that out. We always need to monitor, because at any point in time, any of us could decide, you know what, I'm tired of being on the straight and narrow. Screw it. I'm going to get off. I'm going to do me. Oh, okay. There's a novel concept, right? And so, that's a phrase that a lot of the inmates or a lot of people say, you know what, I'm just doing me. Well, you ever done that? That's what happens with 2-year-olds in a sandbox. I'm doing me. So we have to help people understand and get an other-centered, an other orientation, that other people matter just as much as me. We also matter. So codependents say other people matter more than us. But if you listen to any flight attendant, they'll say, put on your own oxygen mask first. In the unlikely event of a loss in cabin pressure, the little mask drop down. So each person matters. But the more selfish somebody becomes, the more they will view themselves more. It's like scales of justice. The more my self-esteem goes up, I'm not saying it's healthy, but the more I feel entitled to, and by virtue of that, my value, my perspective of you drops. This is the beginning of psychopathy.
Right.
And the world promotes it.
Look at Jimmy Savile was like the most Catholic dude. He was going to church every day, and he was like molesting the little kids that are, in the service. He and he thinks he's allowed to because, I'm making all the, like, his messed up satanic mind believes that, if I do this much good in the world, I'm allowed to do this much bad in the world. So the more like money he raised for Jim will fix it or whatever the hell all he was doing, like that just emboldened him to rape corpses. I mean, like, what? He was such a disgusting person.
Now we'll get into that, because what I would say is this: all the good he was doing was simply impression management, and he was having a good time playing good people for fools.
That was the deception, exactly.
Well, there you go. So what's interesting, and I don't say this, and here I have a smile on my face, but it's probably like emergency room humor. If anybody those of us that have had to deal with trauma related to people that have been impacted by perpetrators, right? We're either going to melt down, or we find some way to deal with the trauma. And so most of us deal with trauma, and also the same thing for emergency room personnel, same thing for law enforcement, same thing for military. You get a quirky sense of humor because that's how you kind of work your way through it. So if anybody hears or sees me smile at certain things, it's not funny. It's just a way of dealing with it. A lot of survivors, as a matter of fact, you'll find that as they're describing their stories, Carrie Elahe has also mentioned, she said, because she'll laugh as she describes something horrific. It's not that she's downplaying it. That's just a very normal trauma response. So if anybody is now, I'm describing psychopaths and I smile, there's nothing funny about it. But bear with me because I've been dealing with them so long. Right. That's like, I have a tendency to say, well, normal sex offenders versus, it's like, what?
I know.
What's normal about sex offenders, folks? I
Jesus.
want you to know. Okay.
Yeah.
But there's a whole gradation of sex offenders. None of them are is a positive thing, right? But there's a big difference between, let's say, an 18 or a 19-year-old who should have been on to college girls, should have been on to a different peer group, decided to still keep his friends in high school, and he's dating the 16-year-old. And he was the senior, she was the sophomore. Now he graduates and he's in college. He turned 18, she's a junior, and all of a sudden they have sex and the parents find out, and he's now listed as what? He could be in sex offender treatment.
Well, I mean, he might be like not that bad but there's still a power dynamic between him being the older, and that right there is the opening of the door of I mean, look at the power dynamic that the psychopathic politicians have, and how they manipulate the less wise, the younger people that fall into these traps, so maybe it's just the opening of the seed of that person's blooming into pedophile,
right? Because the question is, why is that guy having sex with her without marrying her first, kind of thing?
Right. Good point. Yeah.
Right. There you go. So the best way to view psychopathy is on a continuum. And so my perspective on psychopathy is this, that as goes conscience, so goes you. Meaning, as goes conscience, so goes your interaction, your perspective, and your attitude. So as goes conscience, so goes your perspective, thus attitude, thus behavior towards other people. And as your selfishness grows, and there's an inverse correlation. So the best way to understand psychopathy is understand selfishness. As you give yourself permission to become selfish, and that comes down to ego. So as your ego grows, your selfishness is growing. It's one and the same. Well, what's the mechanism within you that is God designed to keep you in check? And it all comes down to boundaries, by the way. So boundaries are maintained by two mechanisms within us: conscience and intuition. These are heads and tails of the same coin. This is all the material that I work with the guys in sex offender treatment. Okay. Conscience is designed to keep me in check. Intuition is designed to keep you in check in this sense. Sean, if I get to a point where I care more about me than you, two things are true. You want me to have a conscience so we can have normal social interaction and social contract. A handshake, a man's word is his bond. How do you, right? It used to be. Well,
right.
You're dealing with moral individuals.
We've grown this trusting society over all these years,
right?
But we really worked hard at
fine print and contract law. Why? Right? You can match, as a matter of fact, the degree of empathy and conscience in a society based upon the fine print and how many contract attorneys.
That's pretty good. I like that. Yeah.
Right? Because a psychopath is going to look for loopholes. A man of his word and honor, it used to be a handshake. You take it to the bank, those kind of phrases.
Just look at the tax law,
well,
the federal tax.
And those that are enacting that. So if you're dealing with somebody with a conscience, you don't need a contract attorney. You don't even need a contract. You take their word for it. Why? Because you know they're good. Why? Because they have a conscience. So what's the conscience going to do? Conscience is going to make them place value on you just as much as they place value on them. So they are going to restrain themselves, and they will be compelled to do right. And you won't even have to say a thing. That's the kind of contractor you want to hire, by the way, if you're having work done in your home. But what's the average person that complains about, we hired this guy and he took the money, right? If someone were to say, do you pay the contractor before the job's done?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
and if you have a contractor worth his salt, he won't accept, he'll do 50%. But why is that even a negotiation? Because both have been ripped off. You have contractors that do the job and are ripped off. So he's dealing with customers that don't have a conscience.
Right.
And then,
Well, the contract is written out, the will of both parties. and it's reviewed by both parties. They get to see it in writing. What is the will of the other? And now, okay, I can agree with that. And
That's right. The only reason we need that is because, unfortunately, we live in a society with people without conscience.
Exactly. People that have stuffed away their conscience and have grown to become psychopath.
There you go. So every contract now is written by people anticipating if they ever have to go to court.
Right.
Okay. But if you have a society filled with people that are motivated by honoring their conscience, what that means is I am motivated by your best interest, not mine. But it's actually both. But because it's easy for me to look out for my best interest, my conscience keeps that in check, and therefore I will look out for your best interest. Okay, that's a society that doesn't need a lot of laws. That's the law of love.
That's the anarchy world I dream.
And I totally understand. That's right. So, but as a society shifts, so as goes people, so goes society. Look at it in the U.S. now. We have Black Friday, which is what? I mean, even the title. It's after Thanksgiving here. Everybody lines up at Walmart to buy things they don't need, especially TVs, because what are they going to do when they get that TV? They're going to sit in front of it. But they will trample to death women and children and anybody that falls down as they are going to get the limited number of TVs that they don't need. What kind of society is that? That's a psychopathic society. If you can trample people to death over material goods, you are a psychopath, by the way.
Okay, and it's been cultivated. Like it took many generations for us to get here. And who has been cultivating it? Those same psychopaths that are working in the government and the corporations.
Absolutely. So now what does this have to do with sexual psychopathy? Everything in the sense of this. As goes conscience, so goes empathy and remorse. If I have a conscience, then if I do something to you, if I've crossed your boundaries, if I have negatively impacted you, if I place my stuff on you, my knapsacks to do, and in the book of Proverbs it says this, if we pray for wisdom, we'll know what is right, just, and fair. You give me a society, give me a group of people that manage themselves, that restrain themselves by virtue of what is right, morally right, just, and fair. You're never going to have people that need to have law enforcement and a lot of laws. Exactly. So on the path, it's synonymous with doing what is right, just, and fair. That means how I'm treating other people. So you can find out how spiritual you are by virtue of looking at the people in your life and what do they say about you as far as the extent to which you operate under right, that you do what is right, just, and fair. That'll show you how spiritual you are. That's why the book of James says, you know what? You can claim to be religious all you want, but if you aren't treating people properly, it's not just not doing enough, but are you doing extra? Are you helping them, and are you running your mouth in negative ways? Okay, that'll show you how spiritual you are. Do you control your mouth, and are you altruistic genuinely? So that's quote unquote pure religion. Okay, so a conscience governed and directed person and or society is one that will have empathy. That's what's going to keep them in check. The reason I don't cross somebody else's boundaries is I don't want to harm them. I don't want to negatively impact them. I don't want to oppress them. And that's on a scale of 1 to 10. Okay. Even what I say, I can say something negative to somebody and they'll feel it. I've become verbally oppressive. How about even when I say an offhanded comment to somebody? Does that ever bother me to do that? Well, if I have a conscience, yes. Right? That means I kind of know that I impacted them. I said something negative to them. The more you have a conscience, the more you'll circle back around and go back and repent. What's that going to, that means I'm going to stop doing it. I'm U-turning and I'm going to confess. I'm going to go to that person and I'm going to I'm going to apologize.
Right.
So it doesn't mean overly apologize. That probably means I'm codependent. Now I'm shame-based, but it's being mindful of the effect that we have upon someone. So that's empathy. And then remorse. Am I sorry for doing it? Now, think of a scale of 1 to 10. Now you'll see this chart. So this chart actually that we're seeing in front of us gets going at about a -2 to -3. So I've already gotten off the path and I'm starting to become selfish. And the more selfish I am, I'm going to move from left to right. And the best way to understand this is long before somebody becomes sexually selfish, they're becoming selfish. Okay, so I want people to think in terms of we're looking at selfishness in the realm of sexuality. I could create a chart, maybe I will, on financial psychopaths.
That's a good idea. That's a great
So
idea.
it's really the thing to keep in mind here is, as selfishness grows, what is a person capable of doing? What are they going to get into? And in our culture, probably most cultures, they're going to get into wine, women, and song. They're going to get into money, sex, and power. Okay, so money, sex, and power. You can measure that on a continuum. We're looking at the sex part. So we're looking at what happens when somebody's selfishness grows, self-entitlement grows. There's a whole dynamic process. So if a selfish person, and nobody ever stays the same, we're either getting better or bitter, better or worse. We're either growing in terms of moral character, or we're getting off the path. And now we're starting to, like a snowball, like effect, we're growing in selfishness. Now there's something unique about sex and sexuality for human beings. It's tied to our souls. It's tied to something that no other being in the animal kingdom experiences, which is bonding, which is soul care. Right? That's why the majority of all animals mate each season with other people. Well, we find exceptions, kind of nice. Doves, I guess, keep their own mate. But generally speaking, when an animal copulates, now here's an interesting thought. When we get worse than animals, I've never thought about this. What about the issue of masturbation? I've never seen an animal masturbate. Okay, moving along. That's an interesting thought, right? I also have never seen an animal try to mate with a dead animal. Okay, so it shows you we get even worse. So there's something unique. I believe it's with our design with our Creator, that the two become one. That's very much touching heart and soul. Animals don't celebrate Valentine's Day. They don't celebrate anniversaries. Why? It's uniquely human. Animals don't take photographs. Animals don't do poetry or paint pictures. Animals don't stand in awe of sunsets. There's something very unique. Animals don't reminisce. Well, who knows? Maybe they, right? And the Far Side cartoons, right? They do. But generally speaking, animals aren't contemplative. Right? If they're staring at you, you're either lunch or they're probably tired. I don't know. Right.
Right. They don't have the forebrain. They don't have the will and the prefrontal cortex. Right.
There you go. And they don't make goals. They don't think in terms of leadership qualities. Hey, I'm the alpha male, but you beta guy, if you work real hard, you too can become the alpha male. And right. So there's something unique about human beings above all other mammals in the animal kingdom. And sex and sexuality is designed, I believe, by our Creator to be the greatest relationship and life-enhancing experience, where the two become one, where they know and they are known, where they're naked and unashamed.
Right.
Taken out of that context, sex and sexuality no longer is life-giving, it is life-taking. It becomes self-absorbed. And what you have, especially for males, and here's what's unfortunate about the modern day, the trans movement, the non-binary, all that crap, is what it does is it dumbs down the most basic thing when it comes to understanding how we're made, and also then safeguarding. Because by nature, male sexuality is different than female sexuality as far as how males and females approach sex and sexuality. Every guy understands it intuitively. Think about in high school, how high school boys will approach sex and sexuality versus girls. There used to be a phrase that women give sex to gain love, men give love to gain sex. You have a little phrase, two groups of people, boys or girls, I won't ask you which one immediately. Let's say they're all, you have little groups clumping together. Guys are talking about guys, or talking to guys, girls talking about girls. And one of those groups says, oh, how far did you get? Okay, what group did I just describe?
Right.
Right.
How many times have I heard that? Like, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. The girls are typically going to, what was he like? Okay. And that's the world over.
It's like the movie Grease, how they got that
There
song.
it is.
Like, you know,
We all promoted that. I remember my parents.
did you get very far?
Yeah, that's it. That's male, right there.
Right.
We're going back, right? What was he like? How far did you get? Okay,
Right.
that's the difference between a sex and sexuality of male versus female. If you blur those distinctions, you have removed the ability to discern whether or not psychopathy is going on. And the girls and the kids are always going to be harmed by that. And therefore, now we've gotten to a point in our culture where we can't see that the only kind of guys that would want to get on female sports teams and get into female prisons and dress in women's underwear and drag to get in front of kids are predators.
Right.
Now we say, well, it's art. They're sensitive guys. They're fearful. No, they're perps and they're predators, and we're so dumbed down, and they're laughing all the way to the bank. Right. John, how can you say such a thing? I'm going to show you how. Now, so that was all preface, I guess, to describe. So what you have in this chart, and it, again, you can go on to my site and actually download this chart, is the best way to understand it is the red bar on the top. So really, as goes conscience, everything will flow from there. And when I described this with Emma, what I also did is I drew vertical lines, probably 10 of them, and it matches the degrees of that silver bar. So degrees of deviant arousal, motivation, and intentional harm. You see the categories. What you can do is you can draw a vertical white line because white stands out. And you can separate that. So we have, how many do? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, I did. Yes, 10. So I came up with pretty much 10 categories. The reason I'm pleased, that's a nice number, but that's probably true. So this chart really contains a gradation of 10 categories. And behavior and attitude and disposition will match. And this is the slippery slope. So the best way to view this chart is as goes the red bar up there, so goes
for the listeners that aren't seeing it. The red bar says the progressive violation of conscience into a permanent reprobate condition.
Yes. Now, let me describe the word reprobate. Nobody walks around calling. Maybe some people still know what the word, at least familiar. You're such a reprobate. Now, if you were to ask people what that means, you're just like reprobate. Okay, I'll tell you what the word reprobate. It comes out of, most notably, out of the book of Romans, and it's not a religious term. Romans chapter 1. It says, to a culture that has become 100% callous and a different, really psychopathic. It says, God gave them over, and it's dealing with sexuality, by the way, but it says he gave them over, and it says it 3 times, to a reprobate mind. When Paul wrote that out, he had a lot of words he could have chosen from to describe what happens, what kind of thinking, but it's even more than just cognitive, right? Because you can have somebody very bright who's very debased. Look at Jeffrey Epstein. Yeah. Right, everybody we've been talking about. So a reprobate mind is a mind that is polar opposite of a mind that is a conscience-driven mind. So a mind that the way God designed our minds is one that will naturally place a high value on people and a low value on things. So we'll love people and use things. The more a person or people group or society shifts away from that, they'll eventually twist. So there's going to become a twisting effect, like a fighter jet flying into a cloud bank. We got an F-16, F-18, it goes in there and it does a barrel roll. Now let's say it doesn't know. Let's say the pilot doesn't know he's done a barrel roll because apparently his ability to discern, it's all, the canopy, you're going into this fog. And let's just pretend he's inverted now. Well, he's getting close to a mountain range, and the speaker system says, mountain range, pull up. Well, he feels he is right side up, but all his instrumentation and his speaker system says what? So what's he going to do? If he trusts himself at that point, if the objective indicators tells him he's all inverted, and he doesn't listen to that outside input, and he goes with how he feels, he's going to drive himself into the mountain range. He's going to pull up and drive himself down. That's what happens as you get midway into the reprobation process. So a reprobate mind, the word reprobate comes from metallurgy. So it's a non-religious term that Paul used. It means it's no longer good for its intended purpose, which means if you are an engineer and you're building a bridge, you don't want to use a piece of defective metal that was stamped reprobate. Now, for those of us that aren't engineers, we say, well, I don't know, what's the big deal? And so I would have an engineer saying, no, John, you don't understand tensile strength. You don't understand. And that would be correct. That's why you don't want me doing brain surgery, exact science. It was not my right. But for those that have an engineering background, you could tell me why the quality and the strength, the internal tensile strength of that piece of metal is really important. And those of us that drive over bridges, thank you, right? So we are glad you understand the difference between a reprobate piece of metal and a piece of metal that is good when you inspect that bridge, okay? A reprobate mind, therefore, is a mind that is no longer good for its intended. That's an important, that presupposes there is a creator, meaning according to design.
Right.
Your mind no longer works according to design, which is this. Your mind no longer values people over things. Your mind will now objectify people. You create objects out of people, and you now value objects. So you are in the process of ever increasingly objectifying people. So if you are into money, you are going to financially objectify people. Where do we find you? We find you in Wall Street. We find you in the banking. We find you selling cars. We find you, right, selling timeshares. Okay. Yeah. And, right, the only place we don't find you, we don't find you in the IRS because you're not a psych, you're just straight up, right? You know that in the power, if people don't take out their wallet, you can have them arrested. Everybody else has to have finesse. So
that goes along with if the person is an ego-centered person who wants to have power over others, that the ability to use the government as a weapon to harm others into being compliant with their will is like it's ego aggrandizement, and it feeds that ego of themselves. So like you'll have the person who is a parole officer got that job because he likes to like be that way towards others. It seems like it fits their personality. And I'm sorry I interrupted.
There are some decent parole officers, but
let's hope so. I hope so.
You're in a position of power over somebody,
right?
Depending upon what you say, or as they say, the power of the pen, right? I, by degree, the last person you want, well, maybe, right? The last person you want is a psychopath being a sex offender treatment provider, because then I'm all about self. And you don't want me liking these guys or disliking these guys. If I dislike them, I can jam them up. Now they can, if there was going to be hope for him, now I can create a jaded sex offender. Now, by the time he does get out and he's off of parole, because they can stay in prison long enough to where they get out and they're not on parole.
Right.
So the last thing you want is a jaded, angry sex offender, or you don't want somebody who is suckered by them. So either way.
Good. Yeah. Very. So this reprobate condition, the human being is built to love and care for others. It's inherent in us. Like the mother loves baby loves mother. Like it's part of the human condition. But the pushing that away and severing ourselves from that compassion is what leads us into this reprobate condition where we are no longer usable as for God's plan. We no longer can walk that person no longer can walk the right path because their rudder is off course, and they focus on material gain and ego rather than care for others and compassion.
Right. Spot on. As a matter of fact, their true north is true south. So everything becomes inverted. And that's what I never would have guessed, never would have understood if I hadn't had the chance so long now for 15 years. But to really get into the minds of a psychopath Now, does it mean that every single guy in sex offender treatment is a psychopath? No. Does it mean I have a higher percentage of guys that I work with that are psychopathic? 100% correct. Now, aside from doing a brain scan, and does that even match what they're capable of, right? But just shy of doing a brain scan, nobody's going to do brain scans with sex offenders. The question is, because who's going to pay for all that?
Right.
The question is,
and which offender would allow that?
Right.
Anyway,
so the question is, how do you discern, and to even bring it close to home, if there's anybody right now that is online dating on Tinder or whatever? I'm going to especially address the women right now, but you have female psychopaths. Mm-hmm. Okay. Ladies, the question is this: how do you know who the guy is that you're dating with? That you're interacting with, that you're potentially going to go out on this date? How do you know? You'd better know, because some women have never returned. Okay, that's the extreme case. I'll tell you what, for a woman, if you watched the movies and if it became something endearing to you, the series 50 Shades of Grey. Okay. If that is something that you think positive of, you've already been groomed by psychopaths. And
very well said.
Right? And I remember
just like Cuties on Netflix, like all of these things, like all of it, it's grooming. Yes,
100%. As a matter of fact, I had the unique opportunity when the first edition, or part one, 50 Shades of Grey, I remember when it came out, very interesting, quote unquote, academic researcher, because I was also with Geneva College. So I could say I did academic research with this, which is this. I'm doing group with the guys. It's 9 a.m. I have my first group. They come in. It's Friday, February 14th. I remember it because it was such a unique opportunity. Because I asked the guys in my group, what do you think about this? Because I remembered they have block TV and they can see regular commercials. And so they were aware of it, more so even than me.
Right.
And you got to be able to outsmart psychopaths, right? And that's why in an interview, you're never going to be able to do that. So there's a couple different ways. I don't want to say how I outsmart psychopaths, but all things being equal, okay, I'll give you a hint. You kind of play dumb in a way and you feed their ego, and then they'll be willing eventually to talk. But I was able to ask them, so what do you guys think about this? And almost to a guy, they were willing to admit, except pedophiles, they'll never admit. Very interesting. So within even the group of sex offenders, you can see the difference between sociopaths and psychopaths. It's difference between sales versus having a negative effect. And I'll describe that in a moment. That's really the difference. Of all groups within those groups that are the most, for all the guys, the most irritating and the most tiring to work with is the pedophiles, because they will never admit. A pedophile will never admit. So it's quite something. Of all groups of sex offenders, so they really stand out. There's a lot of different ways. But I asked the guys, so what do you think about this movie, The 50 Shades of Grey? So sex offenders, pedophiles aside, because their opinion's worthless because they'll never admit anyways. The majority of the guys said this. To a man, they said, well, can't believe the women are falling for it, and it's made life easier for us if we were out still doing that. It's done the grooming for the sex offender, because why? Because now a woman can't discern the difference between sexual assault and the methods that used to be applied in the Middle Ages to extract information or a confession.
Right. Let's see if she likes this. Let's disembowel her next.
That's it. What it's done is it's dumbed down a woman's intuition. So the two mechanisms in play that will maintain boundaries are conscience, that keeps me in check. But what happens if I get to a point, as I'm progressing snowball-like fashion in my selfishness, the world's revolving around me, I'm going to honor my conscience less and less. That means I'm putting the brakes on me less and less, so I can get to a point where I will no longer apply the brakes. Why? I don't want to apply the brakes. Why? The world revolves around me, and it's the world for my taking. Therefore, if you have it and I want it, I will take it. So what's going to stop me from helping me to your body if you're a female and I'm a sex offender, or if you're a child and I'm a sex offender? What's going to stop?
A gun
Right?
will stop him.
Better be something else. If you're relying upon me to stop me, if I've become reprobate, so my mind now no longer works normally, in what way? I now value me and the benefit that you can provide or serve me over you. It's all about me. I'm a walking ego, but the smarter I am, you won't know it. So the more psychopathic somebody becomes, they're going to be one of two extremes. If they're a reactive psychopath, as a matter of fact, that's where I'm on the back of, we need 6 hours. Sorry, I've been going on.
No, this is great. I could go till 2 o'clock. So we're
okay.
Okay.
You know what? And that'll be perfect. I've got, no, I only have one. I have a client right now.
That's okay. I'll try to.
If you scroll down, I'll show people how they can use this chart or see this chart. So you'll see where the arrows are on this chart. So, Sean, if you want to kind of scroll down a little bit, what'll happen is, again, here we go. So think in terms of gradation. The blue dotted line, by the way, is legal on the left. That's the legal versus illegal line. So you can see it already starts. The process starts as I violate conscience. I'm then going to, in the second silver box down there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-ish, right in the degrees of deviant sexual arousal, you'll see that I'm starting to get into stuff and it's more impulsive. What people need to understand is this: unless you're dealing with bloody psychopaths, rare will be the time that the more psychopathic they become, the more you will know it. Now, Richard
because of their ability to cover it up, is that?
Okay, so that's
intelligence.
So Richard Ramirez was pretty unique. So let's say serial rapist murderer that's holding a city hostage because they're finding dead bodies. So they're shutting, they have curfew. Everybody is very nervous. Okay. You notice the guy isn't showing his face in public. So he's hidden. He is concealed himself. That's that's a bloody psychopath that, what I would say, is not only impulsive, but he's hidden. Okay.
And he understands the ramifications of what he did.
Absolutely.
Covering it up rather than somebody that's just nescient and doesn't know he's not supposed to murder or whatever.
Good, right? That's right. Meaning not good that he's doing it, but absolutely. But the psychopaths that everybody should worry about are the ones that don't look like psychopaths, what I call the sophisticated psychopaths. Those are the ones that everybody was surprised. By the time the guy's busted, people around him saying, why not him? Why are they saying that? Because he's in a position of authority, respect, or trust, because he looks so normal and even above average. He's the cream of the crop.
Right.
By the time he's the priest, he's the CEO, he's the
Dennis Hastert, or like the politicians, right?
Absolutely. He's the Sandusky. He's the okay. He runs the charity. He runs the Red Cross kind of effect, right? Disaster relief. Okay. So what people need to understand is, as somebody is violating his conscience, he's going to look more weird or he's going to look more normal.
Good point.
If they look more weird, they're going to get busted sooner rather than later. And people aren't going to be around them. So the likelihood of them having hundreds and hundreds of victims is pretty rare.
Right.
But the more they can look normal, now you're dealing with a completely different kettle of fish. And that is what is shown on these little red arrows, but especially going downward. So on the below that red line right there. Right. So what you have is the degree of planning. You'll see the degree of intensity and premeditation or planning. Okay, for the ones that people need to worry about the most, that you will least suspect it, is the one that goes down the degree of planning right there in that bottom box. Okay,
so it starts with habitual, then pragmatic, then manipulative, calculating, strategic, tactical, methodical, precision, ritualistic, malevolent, cold-blooded, diabolical at the end. So this is for the listeners that can't see it. I just wanted to speak it out.
There we go. So it's, as someone is becoming more reprobate, their ego is growing, their conscience is disappearing over time. And so the only thing to stop someone, that person, is someone else, and that has to be their intuition. So every cult leader, manipulator, selfish person, psychopath, what they're going to do is this, and that's all by degree. They're going to begin to work somebody. We call it grooming. What is grooming? I am getting someone to trust me and discount and distrust themselves. I'm causing them to turn the volume down on their own intuition, because intuition will give you information prior to you having enough in front of your face, definitively. If you wait until there's enough information to find out whether or not you're being ripped off, the snake oil salesman's gotten out of Dodge, the Calistoga wagon, they've sold you snake oil and they're out of Dodge and they moved on, and you will never be able to get your money back, right? We have lemon laws to protect against sociopaths and psychopaths. And by the way, the difference between a sociopath and a psychopath, best way to view it, and the only way to understand it, in my estimation, is on this continuum scale 1 to 10. Okay, so there's a little term out there. It sounds really cool, but it's silly in my estimation. The dark triad. Everybody go, ooh, I don't want to meet somebody that's dark triad. Why? Because they are narcissistic, sociopathic, and they have Machiavellian traits. It's all redundant. Let me ask you this. What psychopath isn't narcissistic? What's narcissism? You're the center of the universe. There's simple narcissism and sophisticated narcissism. Simple narcissism is, I love me, don't you love me? Okay, enough about me, tell me about me, and where's the mirror? I need to check me out. Well, you know what? Everybody knows those kind of people. Nobody wants to be around them. That has a short shelf life that's not being very effective. Everybody knows that kind of narcissist. Okay. The malignant narcissist, okay. People know those people and they don't want to be around them. That's why people roll their eyes like, oh gosh, do I really need to be around my mother-in-law? So, okay. So you're only going to be around that person if you have to be around that person. You're not going to choose to be around that person. You're not going to decide to move into the compound. You're not going to decide to give your money as the cult leader to that person. But why does the cult leader allow you to move into the compound and take your money? Because they're self-centered. They're lying through their teeth, but they're really good at it, so they're manipulating. So the question is this: is there anything wrong with the manipulator's self-esteem? Now, it's whacked out, but do they have a good self-esteem? Meaning, does the world revolve around them? Absolutely. So a narcissist is someone that feels entitled to everybody else's boundaries. If they're sophisticated, you won't know it because they're going to be polished. Right. So what they'll
groom you out of those boundaries.
There you go, right? They're gonna actually make it so you like standing up and taking out cash and giving it to them. That's why they go into the ministry.
Right.
They'll take a double. They're gonna do. Pass the plate around twice. They're going to be making it, oh, this one's for, right. As a matter of fact, they play to us. Think about the kind of, if it's an aid organization, they'll always show you pictures of little kids. Why? Yeah. And they're saying, we are the world. Why? They're going to collect millions of dollars. Why? Where's the money going? Right. You don't know. They've worked us. So that means people behind the scenes have taken the time to actually put time, effort, energy, and resources into manipulating us. Well, what kind of person does that? Somebody that feels pretty self-entitled. So a true narcissist that is a sophisticated individual has a really good self-esteem. It's whacked out, but there's nothing wrong with their self-esteem. They feel entitled to what's yours, and they want to remove that from you, whether your modesty, whether your sex, whether your money. Okay, so in order to be a psychopath, you have to be a narcissist first. Right. Then the more polished you are, you will become really good at sales. That makes you a sociopath. So what a sociopath is, somebody that's really good at sales.
Can you explain that a little bit for the listeners?
Okay. So a sociopath is someone without a conscience who will continue as long as they can, as long as the getting is good, as long as the cost outweighs the benefit. Oh, no. I'm sorry, invert that. As long as the benefit, as long as it's cost-benefit analysis. So as long as the benefit outweighs the cost, they will continue. That makes them good at sales. Right. So you walk onto a car lot and you're being objectified by a salesperson. We all understand that, right? He's going to upsell you as much as he can. Why? As much as he can. Why? That's what, right? So even if he knows you're on a fixed income and you can't afford it, he's going to upsell you into a vehicle you can't afford. Why? It's the name of the game. That's a sociopath. Right. Now, the difference between a sociopath, if he continues violating his conscience, there's very little conscience left. Eventually, he'll get to a point where it's no longer about what he can get. Now it's the effect he can have on you, the negative effect. The lifestyles of the rich and famous, the uber rich. It's not about, $1 million here or there. It doesn't matter. What they get off on is seeing how they can harm people.
Like domination of others?
There you go. But it's even more than that. It's not just power and control. It is harm. So they feel satisfied when they see somebody in pain.
So this explains the perpetrators of the SRA. They are getting or even the Marquis de Sade, he gets a sexual gratification from the harming of another.
There you go. And that's when you enter deviance. So in this chart, you'll see where it starts. You get the word deviant. What deviance is this, especially, sexual deviance. Okay. Mm-hmm. Where a normal, and I'll focus on males, where a normal man can only get an erection, so he's getting aroused by his partner. I'm going to just say a spouse. So a husband can only get an erection and maintain an erection as long as he knows his wife is enjoying herself and she is along with it, meaning it's engaged. Right. Okay. We say the mood. She's in the mood. Okay. That's a normal man. She can ruin the mood by all of a sudden, right just before he's ready to climax, she says, "Oh, these walls I really need to get these cobwebs out." Mood, right? Mood's gone. The guy can't climax, right? That's a normal guy. Okay. Because he needs to know that his partner is enjoying it. He cares about whether or not she's being pleased. He cares about her. The more selfish a guy gets, and he starts to become inverted and he starts to become reprobate, then it becomes more self-centered, and it gets to a point where it's not just selfish, it's self-entitled. It's not just self-entitled. Now it is you owe me. And then it is you had better, and then it is this. And here's the beginning of deviance. What causes a guy to get an erection or be aroused is not any longer attraction in the relationship. It is, to what extent am I able to harm you?
Wow. Because that's the proof that the other person is allowing your will. It's like,
there you go. That's at the beginning stages. Yeah. Eventually it is, the more the perpetrator can see that he's traumatizing, the more aroused he gets. That is not normal. That is a predator. That's an animal.
Right.
And
that's not driven by procreation.
No,
it's something different.
It's pure evil and darkness. And the danger zone, and so what people need to understand is this. As a man becomes deviant, think about what's happening in his conscience. It's getting less and less. Those of us with a conscience, see, we're at a disadvantage because perpetrators and predators once had a conscience. Therefore, they know how we think, and they know that we like to give them the benefit of the doubt. Normal people give one another the benefit of the doubt. They use that against us, therefore they use empathy against us. As a guy is becoming more and more deviant and he's becoming reprobate, his conscience is diminishing. Therefore, this is the key to understand psychopathy. He is becoming less concerned that his conscience is bothering him, and eventually gets to a point where he doesn't feel anything, and he actually sees the benefit. He likes it that way. And we say, how can they sleep at night? How can they sleep with themselves at night? They must believe their own lies. No, because their conscience doesn't bother them. And there's a great degree of freedom. I don't recommend it, though. When you get to a point that your conscience doesn't work anymore, you actually are not constrained by anything. And then you actually want to double down on it, and they want to become more of what they are. So a deviant individual is being freed from their conscience and actually wanting more of what they are experiencing in terms of selfishness, self-aggrandizement, and the harm they're having on other people.
Right. It's so they are feeling more powerful in themselves, and it's like a power trip that they're getting. Right.
There you go. And they pass the point of no return. So the way to understand this chart is, I would recommend thinking in terms of just as there's a blue dotted line, a horizontal line, think of 10 white lines that match those the boxes there in the degrees of deviant arousal. And each time a guy shifts into one of those new categories, there is an increasing degree of ego, a decreasing degree of conscience, and right about in the middle, actually about in number 4 or 5 box in there.
Yeah, domination.
Conscience probably doesn't work anymore.
Okay.
By the time, or very little. So if you go back up to conscience, as a matter of fact, that's where I try to show once it is cauterized and then what do we call it, fossilized, it's gone. So just about when you reach certainly about the -6 category, it's over. Now it's just how far the guy's going to go and what he's going to get into.
Right.
And so these different unique channels, the arrows, you're going to see based upon personality and then based upon what he gets into, what track he's going to go down. Is he going to be the single, isolated, lone wolf, serial rapist, murderer? How far is he going to go with that? Or serial rapist, then murderer? Or is he going to do like a wolf pack? And is he impulsive? So really above that red line in that box that we're looking at under degrees of intensity and premeditation, it's impulsivity versus calculation. And what people need to understand, the most sophisticated are the most methodical and most planned. And that's where you get MK Ultra and the true SRA that is ritualistic.
Right.
And that's why the perpetrators by day hold positions of authority, of power, leverage, and many of them are mandated reporters themselves. And that's why it's so disarming, and we don't want to believe it because it's like, what, a judge, a lawyer, and an attorney, a police officer, a teacher, a pastor by day, but what are they doing by night?
Right. Right. And a police officer and a pastor in their normal life, a normal police officer or pastor has a certain level of degree of, in my opinion, the illusion of authority, but authority from in the cultural sense over their victims. So like they will try. Trust. Yes. Like, oh, you don't trust Father so-and-so? Like, what do you mean? He's a priest. How could you say that?
They leverage their positions. A case could be made. They could actually go into the position that they went into, the field, or they find the job for the purpose of doing that. Benjamin Levine was head of, in Canada, he was the education minister of the province of Ontario. He's the one that brought in sexy, I'm sorry.
Are you talking about Rachel Levine, the tranny?
Benjamin Levine, he was a heinous pedophile. Okay. He brought in SOGI sex ed. They call it SOGI 1, 2, 3 up there. It's sexual orientation, gender identity. It's all the trans sex ed crap, all the deviants.
Oh, yeah. And he was just found as breaking state laws by pushing the federal law. I just heard about this yesterday on the news where he's getting in trouble for going against state law in certain states to push the trans for kids against the state regulations.
That would be Rachel Levine. That's right.
That's what I'm talking about, right? I'm sorry. I'm thinking that's maybe the man name before it was transitioned.
Right. Look very different. Right. Rachel Levine is the guy that dresses in women's underwear and drag, who's now
right.
Right, but Benjamin Levine was in Canada.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's fine, but both, right? They look very different, but their hearts are the same.
Right.
And that's a great right. Benjamin Levine used his position to get all the deviant sex ed into the schools to groom all the kids. Right. Why was he doing that? Because he was also he was able to advocate for a decreasing amount of penalties for pedophiles in the event he got busted.
This is exactly what Kinsey was doing.
100% correct. That's why the CIA and Rockefeller Foundation funded him. That's 100%. Right. They used him to change all the sex laws and the mores so that when the perps got busted, one way to eliminate sex offenders from going to jail is dumb down the laws, and you have less sex offenders.
Exactly. And who were the people that he was interviewing for his books? There were pedophiles and people in prisons.
That's right.
And he was asking, when was the first time you effed a goat? Not like, have you ever? It was the way that it was. I've done many shows on Kinsey, and
that's right. Right. Somebody says, "Oh, that 2-month-old was climaxing 32 times in 24 hours."
Yeah, it's
like
sick. Table 34. Yeah,
table 34. Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, everybody should look at rest in peace. What is the name of the? Oh man, she wrote many books on Kinsey. Judith Reisman. Yes.
She and I were going to write a book together just before her death.
Oh man, she was a real star in this world.
Nobody did it. Nobody uncovered it.
Oh yeah, she's done a lot of work is to teach us to the grooming that the pornography magazines do. It introduces pedophilia into our regular, like a normal dad might go and get a Playboy magazine or Penthouse, and then they get these cartoons involving rape of little girls, and so it's it's eating away at our own morality as we look at, and as we're reading the magazine, a lot of them, people that are doing it, have their genitalia in their hand, as they're looking at this picture that they're flipping through.
And it's progressive. And and you'll find that depending upon what a guy is into and how far on that continuum, what I really wanted to emphasize with that chart is you're going to be able to match, or you will see there's a corresponding relationship between the kind of crimes, but they're always pled down, of course, but the kind of crimes, by the time the guy got busted, you'll see what kind of pornography he was into. There's a direct correlation between the kind of pornography and the kind of crimes. And what people need to understand is this: the issue is deviance, right? What do you want to focus on when it comes to psychopathy, sexual psychopathy? It's how deviant a guy is. Okay, so deviance has been the issue for millennia, ever since man fell. Mm-hmm. Pornography fast tracks or supercharges the process of deviance. That's what people need to understand. The naysayers will say, "Oh, Uhler, well, what about prior to pornography? How do you explain that?" So I'm very careful to emphasize the issue is sexual. You can become sexual deviant without pornography. You violate your conscience.
Right. You can become a member of Skull and Bones.
But it's like throwing gasoline on a fire.
Right.
So that's the danger of pornography, because where Ted Bundy said he got into, at that time, it would have only been a Playboy.
Right.
Okay. That we are producing at a faster rate male psychopaths at younger ages than we've ever seen. And so you're seeing these juvenile sex offenders because they get on the internet, and now their sex ed and morals are being scripted by what they're seeing and what they're accessing. So we're creating little sexual psychopaths.
This is very important. There's a documentary titled Childhood 2.0. I should have shared it with you before this interview, but it describes the effect on children's minds that grow up with social media in their pocket, and with the cell phone. And part of this documentary, they talk about the pornography, and they're talking with young kids, like teenagers in high school, and they're talking to girls, they're talking to guys, and all of them watch it. They are watching to learn how. The parents are scared to talk about sex with their kids. They expect the schools to do the sex education, whatever. And then these kids, they have a phone in their pocket. All they got to do is click, "Yes, I'm 18." And then they got all the Pornhub and whatever, all the deviants of, like, here's a picture of some woman getting her face stepped on as she gets plugged in the whatever. And, and they're trained into this, looking at it while they're being aroused. So, like, they don't have a normal sexual encounter until after they've already been into the pornography, because this happens long before they ever get to the point where they're intimate with a woman, or or vice versa for the females. And the men are looking at that's normal, and the women talk about how they are forced to perform like the women in the videos in order to entice the men who only watch that all day.
There we go.
So it's changing the behavior of the children, and it's spoken out of their mouths. You must see this documentary, Childhood 2.0. I'll share it with you. I'll send you the file. But it is astounding what we're doing. And for the longest time, pornography is a weapon. They use it as a weapon on the battlefield. They will drop pamphlets of pornography on the enemy. It affects the brain. Anyway, I just wanted to bring that up because the way that they are attacking our culture, it is a weapon. And it is creating mini psychopaths in everybody, and it's creating a culture of psychopathy from the ground up, from the beginning of their brains turning into sexual beings. These young kids that are they're having their puberty and they're watching these videos, and it's in their pocket. They can go to the bathroom at school and just crank one out and go back. So we have to be aware of what it's doing. It's not just, it's just porn. It's just naked ladies, whatever. The Pornhub and stuff, they're always pushing, this is a mother and son doing it. This is like somebody who got they promote the deviancy in the scroll, I guess, of choices that they give the children to click on. So once they click on one, then the algorithm's like, they're like this, and then they're pushing more of that. Like, you like to see the girl's face get stepped on? Here's 5 more videos of that, and we're going to throw in some whips and blood or whatever. And speaking to Carrie Olahi, we spoke about pornography on my show. We did a show about that, and she described her dad, who was a total psychopath, was into snuff porn and would watch snuff porn as he raped her as a kid.
There you go. And you can see the progression in the chart, how a guy gets into that.
Yes.
And I'm so thankful that you are featuring what you are featuring on your channel. I just realized I wish we had more time. I actually now have a client, so people understand I'm working with.
Right.
I have a client right now who's an SRA survivor, who exactly the kinds of stuff that Carrie went through. So this is very serious as a society. We need to understand that the more pornography is pumped out there, the more kids are being harmed, and then horrific things are happening.
Yes.
Then they, 30s, 40s, and 50s, when memories start to come back, then they have to try to unpack the reality of what happened to them.
Right. And make sense of it. And you're there to help them. And God bless you for doing that. And thank you so much for sharing your time. I know that you have is that where you're trying to ease out of this? We have to move on to the Okay, that's fine. I would be very thankful if you could maybe join us again, if you could find space on your calendar, maybe in the future.
Let's arrange that, and I'll bake a little more time into this, but at least people know that I work with perpetrators, and as soon as we're finished, I'm going to be working with, as I have been, a woman that was on the receiving end of similar things that Carrie. So it's very real. SRA, MK Ultra is very, very real. I was not trained in that. I've had to learn the hard way as a therapist that it's very real.
Right.
So,
well, we thank you so much, and I will put many links for the listeners and the viewers to click to see more of your work. And there is SurvivorSupport.net and Unmasking the Trans Movement, and you have a YouTube channel. And there's many places where people can find you, and all of these will be linked below. Is there anything else that you wanted to share with us before we go?
No, I appreciate your work, Sean. I appreciate it. It's an honor to be on with you, honestly.
Oh, well, it's an honor for me to hear that from you. I thank you so much for being here, and it's a delight. And it's very interesting. And like I said, this is the main nerve. Like, we need to learn and understand the brains and what the will of these people before they do the actions to really understand what's happening. And thank you again. And listeners, thank you all for listening. We will see you next time on Wake the Dead. Cheers.